The moon hangs low over the dark forest, and the air is cold enough to bite through the skin, and the only sound is the crunch of dry leaves under hurried feet as a woman runs with all the strength she has left in her body, and every breath she takes feels like it tears her chest apart, and she keeps glancing over her shoulder, because she knows she is not alone, and the shadows behind her are moving fast. Her name is Emily, and she does not know exactly where she is because she had been running for what feels like forever, and the forest seems to twist and change with every turn, and she can barely see the narrow path in front of her, and branches whip across her face, and arms leaving thin lines of pain. But she does not stop because stopping is not an option tonight. Somewhere behind her a man's deep voice shouts something she cannot hear clearly, but the tone is enough to fill her with more fear, and the footsteps grow louder for a moment, and then fade, and then grow louder again, as if the man is playing with her, letting her feel hope before crushing it again, and she feels tears on her cheeks, but they are not from sadness, they are from pure, desperate fear. Emily's lungs burn and her legs feel like they will give way at any moment, but she forces herself to keep going, because the moment she stops will be the moment they catch her, and she cannot let that happen, not after what she saw, not after what she heard them say, and every sound in the forest seems sharper now. The rustle of leaves, the snap of a twig, the hoot of an owl high above, all of it mixes into one long reminder that she is trapped here. Far away, on another narrow path, a man named David is walking home from the small-town market, carrying a cloth bag filled with bread, a carton of milk, and some apples for his young son, who is already asleep in their small cabin. And David is tired, but calm, and he likes the quiet walk through the woods because it gives him time to think. But tonight something feels different, and he notices it the moment the wind shifts. There is a sound hidden in the wind, a sound that does not belong to the forest, and David stops and listens. And at first he thinks it is just the call of an animal, but then he hears it again, and this time it is clearer, a human sound, a sharp cry that is quickly cut off, and something inside him changes, as if a switch has been flipped, and his easy, gentle walk is now replaced with a focus he has not felt in years. David places the grocery bag down behind a fallen tree and moves toward the sound with quick, quiet steps, and his eyes scan the shadows between the trees, and his breathing slows, not from fear, but from training, the kind of control that only comes from a life that once demanded it. And though no one in the small town knows much about David, they all think of him as the quiet single dad who keeps to himself. But in this moment he is something else entirely. The sound of footsteps grows louder, and David can tell there are at least two people, maybe more. And then out of the darkness a figure bursts through the trees and stumbles into the narrow beam of moonlight. And it is a woman. Her hair is tangled, her clothes torn, and her face pale with fear, and she nearly collides with him before stopping and looking up at him with wide, desperate eyes. She tries to speak, but no words come, only quick, shallow gasps, and David can see she has been running for a long time, and before he can ask what happened he hears the other footsteps, and he turns his head slightly toward the noise, his jaw tightening as the shape of a man begins to appear between the trees. Emily grips David's arm with trembling fingers and whispers only two words, "They will kill me." And in that instant David understands enough to know that this is not something he can walk away from, and the air around them feels heavy, as if the forest itself is holding its breath, waiting to see what will happen next. The man chasing her steps closer, his boots loud on the forest floor, and David shifts his stance, without thinking, placing himself between Emily and the stranger, and his voice, when he finally speaks, is low and steady, and carries a weight that makes the man hesitate. "Who are you?" the stranger demands, but David does not answer. Instead his eyes lock on the man's every movement, reading him, measuring him. Emily's heart is still pounding in her chest, and she feels a strange mix of fear and safety, standing behind this quiet man who appeared out of nowhere, and she cannot explain why. But she feels like he might actually be able to protect her, and the forest around them stays silent, except for the slow, steady sound of David's breathing and the faint rustle of leaves as the wind moves through the tall, dark trees. In that moment the chase has stopped, but the danger has not, and none of them yet know that tonight is only the beginning of something far more dangerous than a run through the forest, and that the man standing in front of Emily is not just a single dad, but someone with a past that could change everything. The forest feels colder now, as the man steps out from between the trees, his shadow stretching long across the ground under the silver moon, and his eyes are locked on Emily, but then they flicker to David, and there is a flash of surprise there, as if he was not expecting to find anyone else here at this hour, and his lips curl into a small smile that does not reach his eyes. Emily's fingers are still gripping David's arm tightly, and her breath is uneven, and every time the stranger takes a step forward, she takes a small step back behind David, as if she knows instinctively that this man will not let her be taken without a fight, and David's body is still and steady like a wall that cannot be moved, and his voice, when it comes, is low and calm, yet carries a sharp edge that makes the air feel heavy. The stranger tilts his head and asks softly, "Who is she?" But David does not answer, and his silence seems to bother the man, who now takes another step forward, his boots crunching over dry leaves and twigs, and Emily's heart pounds harder, because she knows this man will not leave without her. And yet she also senses that David is not an ordinary bystander, and there is something in his eyes that makes even the darkness around them seem to pause. For a moment nobody moves. The forest is still, and the wind is holding its breath, and David studies the stranger with the focus of a hunter, reading every shift in his stance, every flicker of his hands. And when the stranger finally says, "She belongs to us," David replies in a voice so quiet it almost blends with the wind, "Not tonight." Something in the way he says it makes the stranger hesitate, and Emily sees a brief flicker of uncertainty on his face. But it vanishes quickly, replaced by anger, and his voice grows harsher as he warns David to step aside. But David simply shifts his weight slightly, placing himself more firmly between the man and the woman, and the silence that follows feels sharp, like the moment before lightning strikes. Emily can feel the tension in the air, and it reminds her of an animal cornered by a predator. Except here the predator does not realize that the prey standing in front of him is far more dangerous than he appears, and she wonders why David is so calm, why his eyes never blink, and why his voice never shakes. And she thinks about the way he had appeared in her path, like he was meant to be there at that exact moment. The stranger glances behind him, and Emily catches sight of two more figures hidden among the trees, their faces barely visible in the darkness, and fear rushes through her. But David's voice comes again, steady as stone. "Leave now," he says, and the man lets out a laugh that is short and without humor as he steps closer until he is only a few feet away. In one smooth motion, David takes a small step forward, closing the distance, just enough to make the stranger stop moving, and for a long second they stare at each other, and Emily feels the air grow heavier still, and then the man mutters something under his breath and signals to the others in the shadows, and they fade back into the darkness without another word, though Emily knows this is not over, and that they will return. David waits until the sound of their retreating footsteps is gone before turning to Emily, his voice softer now. "Are you hurt?" he asks, and she shakes her head, but her voice trembles. When she says they will come back, they always do, and David studies her face for a moment, as if weighing her words against something only he knows, and finally he says, "Then we will be ready." He leads her away from the narrow path and deeper into the forest, moving with surprising ease even in the dark, and Emily struggles to keep up, her legs aching from the earlier chase, and she cannot stop glancing behind them, expecting to see the shadows reappear, but all she hears is the quiet rhythm of David's steps and the rustle of leaves overhead. After what feels like a long time, they reach a small clearing where the moonlight spills across a cabin tucked between the trees, and smoke curls from its chimney, and David opens the door and steps aside for her to enter the warm glow of a single lamp filling the room, and the scent of wood smoke making the space feel safe, though Emily is not sure safety is possible anymore. Inside the cabin, a small boy is sleeping on a couch, his head resting against a worn pillow, and David's eyes soften as he looks at the child, but only for a moment before that guarded focus returns, and he motions for Emily to sit while he pours her a cup of hot tea from a kettle on the stove. The warmth of the cup in her hands is the first comfort she has felt in hours. Emily watches him move around the cabin, and she wonders again who he really is, because something in the way he stood against a stranger felt trained and controlled, like a man who has faced worse than this night and survived, and she wants to ask, but the words do not come, and instead she sips the tea and listens to the sound of the fire crackling softly. Outside, the forest is quiet, but both of them know it will not stay that way for long, and somewhere out there in the shadows the men are waiting, planning their next move, while inside the small cabin Emily sits across from a man who the town believes is just a quiet single father, but who tonight has shown her that there is far more hidden beneath the surface, and she feels a strange mix of fear and hope for what will come next. The cabin is quiet except for the crackle of the fire and the soft breathing of David's son, who is still asleep, and Emily sits in the wooden chair, holding the warm tea cup between her cold hands, and her mind is still spinning from the chase through the forest, and the strange calm of the man sitting across from her. David leans forward slightly, his elbows resting on his knees, and his eyes fixed on her in a way that feels both careful and direct. He asks her name, and she tells him softly, Emily, and when he asks why the men were after her, she hesitates, because the memory feels like a weight pressing on her chest. But finally she says she saw something she should not have seen, something they could not let her speak about. David listens without interrupting, his face still and unreadable. But Emily notices that when she speaks about the men, his eyes narrow, just slightly, as if each word is being stored away like a piece of a puzzle. And she can feel that he is thinking ahead to what might come next, even though he has said very little so far. She explains that earlier that night she had been walking near the edge of town when she heard voices by an old warehouse, and curiosity pulled her closer. And what she saw made her freeze. 3 men unloading heavy black bags from a van, and one of the bags moved as if something or someone was inside, and she heard one of them mention a name she did not recognize, and when they saw her, everything changed. Emily's voice shakes as she says they started chasing her, and she ran without looking back until the forest swallowed her, and that is when she found David, and she keeps her eyes on the steam rising from her tea, because speaking the memory out loud makes it feel even more dangerous. David stands quietly and walks to a small shelf in the corner of the cabin, and from it he takes a folded wool blanket and drapes it over her shoulders. Without a word, then he walks to the window and moves the curtain just enough to look outside, scanning the dark trees beyond the clearing, his posture relaxed, yet somehow ready for anything. Emily studies him now, noticing small details she had not seen before: the way he moves, without wasted motion, the faint scars along his forearms, the steady, controlled rhythm of his breathing. She has met men who claim to be strong, but David carries his strength differently. It is quiet, hidden, but undeniable. David turns back to her and says, "They will not stop looking for you, you know that," and Emily nods slowly, fear tightening her chest again. And then he adds, "But they will not find you here, not unless I want them to." And the certainty in his voice is so complete that for the first time since the chase began, she feels a flicker of real hope. After making sure the doors are locked and the windows secured, David steps into a small side room. For a moment, Emily hears a faint metallic sound like something being unlatched. And when he returns, he is holding a small black case which he sets on the table in front of him. He opens it, and inside Emily sees a combat knife with a worn handle, a neatly folded patch with an anchor and trident symbol, and a map of the surrounding forest marked with faded notes and symbols. Emily looks from the objects to David, her voice low. "You were in the military?" And David simply says, "Yes, once a long time ago before this," and he glances toward the sleeping boy, and Emily understands without needing to ask more that whatever life he had before ended when his son needed him, but the way he holds himself tells her that the skills he once had never truly left. The firelight flickers across his face, and for a moment she catches a glimpse of something deeper, a shadow of the man he used to be. And she realizes that the men chasing her have no idea who they are dealing with. They think they are hunting an ordinary man in a cabin, but they are walking straight towards someone who knows how to hunt back. David closes the case and sets it aside, and then he tells her that tomorrow he will send his son to stay with a friend in town, somewhere safe, and after that they will figure out how to deal with the men chasing her. His voice is calm, but there is a quiet steel beneath it, and Emily finds herself nodding, even though she has no idea what he plans to do. Outside, the wind moves through the trees, and the sound seems louder now, as if the forest itself is warning them that danger is still close, and Emily pulls the blanket tighter around her shoulders, while David sits back down watching the flames in the fireplace, as if he can already see the steps ahead like pieces on a board waiting to be moved. In the stillness, Emily feels the strange sense that she has stepped into a story much larger than herself, a story where the quiet single dad in the cabin is not just a stranger who helped her in the forest, but a man with a past that could change the outcome of everything that happens next. And though fear still beats fast in her heart, she also feels something else, the faint but growing belief that with David on her side, she might actually survive what is coming. The first light of morning creeps through the trees and slips into the cabin, touching the wooden floor with a pale glow, and Emily wakes to the smell of coffee brewing and the soft clink of a cup being set on the table. She sees David already dressed in a dark jacket, his movements quiet and controlled as he checks the locks once more before sitting across from her. He tells her in a steady voice that his son will be leaving soon to stay with a friend in town, and Emily glances at the boy still asleep on the couch, his small face peaceful and unaware of the danger outside, and she feels a pang of guilt for bringing this threat into their home. But David's eyes meet hers, and he says he did not bring it here, they did, and his tone leaves no room for argument. After breakfast, David walks his son outside to a small old truck parked in the clearing. The air is crisp and filled with the scent of pine and damp earth, and Emily stands in the doorway, watching as David crouches to speak to the boy, his voice low and warm, and the boy nods before climbing into the truck with a trusted neighbor who waves before driving away down the narrow dirt path that leads to town. When David returns to the cabin, there is a change in him, his expression sharper, his steps more deliberate, and Emily feels the shift in the air like the quiet moment before a storm, and she knows without him saying it that he is preparing for something that will happen soon. He asks her to tell him everything she remembers from last night, every word, every sound, every detail, no matter how small, and she does her best to recall each moment. David listens intently, occasionally asking short questions to clarify, and when she finishes he goes to the same side room as before and returns with a folded map which he spreads out on the table. The paper is worn and marked with faint lines and symbols. He traces a path through the forest with his finger, explaining how the men likely entered and where they might return, and Emily realizes that he is already thinking ahead to every possibility. Outside, the forest is quiet, but David does not trust the quiet, and he steps out into the clearing, scanning the tree-line, his eyes moving with precision, as if measuring distances and angles. Emily follows him and sees him checking certain spots near the cabin, small details. She would have missed a low branch, a cluster of rocks, a narrow dip in the ground, and she realizes he is not just looking, he is planning. Back inside, he opens a drawer and takes out a small metal box filled with items. She does not recognize: pieces of rope, a flashlight, extra batteries, and something that looks like a small radio. He places them on the table in a neat row, and Emily cannot help but ask, "Why do you have all this?" And David gives a small half smile, the kind that does not reach his eyes, and says, "Old habits." As the day moves on, Emily tries to rest, but her mind will not settle. She keeps glancing out the window, expecting to see movement among the trees, and each time the shadows shift, her heart jumps, and she wonders how David can remain so calm, though she suspects it is not calm at all, but a deep focus honed long before she met him. In the late afternoon, David steps outside again, this time carrying the black case she saw before, and he kneels in the dirt near the edge of the clearing, working quietly. For several minutes, Emily cannot see exactly what he is doing, but she notices the way his hands move with practiced care, and when he finally stands, he brushes the dirt from his hands and walks back inside without explanation. The sun begins to sink, casting long golden beams through the forest, and the shadows grow deeper, and Emily feels the weight of the coming night pressing down on her. She knows the men will not wait long, and she can almost feel them out there somewhere, moving closer. With each passing hour, David seems to feel it too, though. He says nothing. Instead, he moves through the cabin one last time, checking the windows, adjusting the heavy curtains, and making sure the old wooden door is firmly secured. When darkness finally settles over the clearing, the cabin feels smaller, as if the walls are closing in. The fire crackles in the hearth, but the warmth does not chase away the chill that hangs in the air, and Emily sits by the table, her hands wrapped around a fresh cup of tea, while David sits near the window, his gaze fixed on the dark forest outside, his body still but ready like a coiled spring. The silence is broken by a faint sound far away, a crunch of leaves, then nothing, and Emily looks at David, his eyes narrow. But he does not move. A moment later, the sound comes again, closer this time, and her breath catches in her throat. David stands slowly and moves to the door, his hand resting lightly on the handle, not to open it, but to feel the vibrations from outside. He turns to her and says quietly, "They are here," and Emily's stomach twists at the words. But before she can speak, David steps away from the door, his movements fast but smooth, and she understands that whatever is about to happen, he has already prepared for it, and the men outside have no idea that the man they are walking toward is not just a single father, but something far more dangerous. The forest is a shadow of twisting shapes and shifting sounds, and Emily sits frozen in the cabin, listening to the faint movements outside, while David moves with quiet speed, gathering a few small items from the table and slipping them into the pockets of his jacket, his eyes never leaving the windows, as he studies the dark beyond the clearing. He tells her in a low voice to stay inside no matter what she hears, and Emily wants to protest, but something in his tone keeps her silent. He opens the old wooden door just enough to slip out, and then he is gone, the cold night air rushing in for a moment before the latch falls back into place, leaving her alone with the firelight and the sound of her own heartbeat. Outside, David moves like the night itself, blending into the dark, and the men searching for the cabin do not hear him approach. He knows the forest better than they do. Every root, every low branch, every hidden path is mapped in his mind, and he uses the shadows as cover, sliding between trees. Without a sound, his footsteps no louder than the wind in the leaves. He spots the first man near the edge of the clearing, the one with a thick jacket and a restless way of looking around. The man is armed, but careless, his attention fixed on the cabin, and David uses that to his advantage, circling wide to come up behind him. A quick, sharp movement, and the man is on the ground, breathing, but no longer able to move. Quietly, David pulls him deeper into the trees and vanishes again into the dark. Further into the forest, he hears two more voices, low and tense. One of them is the stranger from the night. Before his tone sharp with frustration, David stays, still listening to their words. They think Emily is alone inside, and they are planning to rush the cabin from opposite sides. David smiles faintly, though there is no humor in it, because they have already lost the advantage they believe they hold. He begins moving again, this time toward a narrow path that curves behind a cluster of thick pines. It is one of several routes he marked earlier in the day, and along it he has set small traps hidden in the leaves. Nothing that will cause serious harm, but enough to slow and disorient, and he knows that once fear creeps in, even trained men can make mistakes. The first trap springs with a soft snap, and a muffled curse follows the man, caught only long enough for David to close the distance. He steps from the shadows, his movements sudden and precise, and the man barely has time to react before he is disarmed and pushed to the ground. David leaves him there and melts back into the dark. Only one remains now, the leader, and David knows he will be the most dangerous, but also the most predictable, because men like him trust in their own strength too much. David finds him near a fallen log, scanning the clearing for any sign of movement, his weapon held loosely. As if he expects an easy finish, David waits in the silence, letting the man's impatience grow, and then he tosses a small stone into the brush to the left. The leader turns toward the sound, and in that moment David moves from the opposite side, silent, and to the last step, his hand striking the weapon away, and his other arm locking around the man's neck. The struggle is brief, the forest swallowing the sounds until only the night remains. When it is done, David stands still for a moment, listening to the forest, and when he is sure there are no more threats, he begins the slow walk back to the cabin, his breath steady, his footsteps careful, so as not to alert Emily too soon. He steps into the clearing and pauses, scanning the treeline one last time before opening the door. Emily is standing by the table, her eyes wide with fear and relief. As he steps inside, she sees no sign of what happened outside, only the calm in his face and the faint glint in his eyes. He tells her quietly it is over for now, but his tone makes her understand that this is not the end, not yet. He moves to the window, looking out into the darkness again, as if expecting it to move, and Emily realizes that while the men who came tonight are gone, the danger behind them is still very real. She sits down, her hands trembling, but her voice steady, when she says, "You were ready for them," and David glances at her for a moment, before saying, "I told you I would be." The fire crackles softly, but the night outside feels heavier than before, as if the forest itself knows this is only a pause in something larger, and Emily understands that whatever David's plan is, it will not end with hiding. She has seen enough in his movements, in his eyes, to know that when the time comes he will take the fight to them, and that thought fills her with both fear and a strange, unshakable hope. The night passes slowly, and Emily does not sleep, her mind replaying the sounds she heard outside, and the calm way David returned. As if nothing had happened, she sits in a chair by the fire, watching him, as he leans against the wall near the window, his eyes always on the forest, and she wonders how many hours he has stood like that without moving. When the first light of morning touches the clearing, David finally steps away from the window, and tells her they will need to leave soon. The men from last night will not be the last, and whoever sent them will not stop until they have what they want. Emily feels a wave of fear, but also a strange trust, because she knows he is not guessing, he is certain. They pack quickly, David taking only what is necessary and placing the black case in his bag along with a folded map and a small radio. Emily gathers a few clothes and a jacket, her hands shaking slightly as she tries to imagine where they are going. David does not explain much, only that there is a place where they can disappear for a while, and that once they are safe, he will deal with the rest. As they step into the forest, the air is cool, and still the only sound the crunch of their boots on the damp earth. David moves, with purpose, guiding her along paths she has never seen before, paths that twist and narrow until the cabin is far behind them. Emily keeps closer eyes darting to the shadows, but David never seems uncertain. Not once does he hesitate. Hours pass before they reach a ridge that looks out over a deep valley. The view stretches for miles, but David's attention is fixed on a small road far below. A black SUV is parked there, and three men stand beside it, one of them tall, broad-shouldered, a stance full of confidence. Even from this distance, Emily can feel the weight of his presence, and something in David's expression changes when he sees the man. That is their leader. David says, his voice quiet but steady. Emily looks at him, startled. You know him, she asks, and he nods slowly, his eyes still on the man below. Years ago, we were on the same side, and now we are not. Emily hears the finality in his words and understands that whatever is about to happen is not just about her, it is about something much older, much deeper. David tells her to wait where she is, no matter what she hears. Then he begins moving down the slope, silent as shadow weaving through the trees, until he disappears from sight. Emily's heart races as she watches the scene below. The tall man turns at the last moment as David steps into view, and even from here she can sense the tension between them. They speak, though she cannot hear the words, and then the tall man laughs, a short, cold sound. David does not move his stance, steady, his hands loose at his sides like a man ready for anything. The tall man's laughter fades, and the two begin to circle each other, the other men hanging back, uncertain whether to intervene. Suddenly the space between them closes. David moves first, fast and controlled, then the tall man reacts, but not fast enough. Their fight is silent, but sharp, each strike and block carrying weight and precision. Emily's breath catches as she watches, unable to look away, and then it is over. The tall man on the ground, his weapon out of reach. David standing over him, his chest rising and falling with measured breaths. From her place on the ridge, Emily sees David speak to the man one last time, his voice low and firm. Then he steps back, and the other men move quickly to help their leader up. They leave without another glance, disappearing down the road until the SUV is gone and the valley is still again. David makes his way back up the ridge, his steps calm, his face unreadable. When he reaches her, he says simply, "It is done for now." She wants to ask what he said to the man, but something in his eyes tells her that the words were for them alone. Instead, she asks the question she has been holding since the night they met. Who are you really? For a moment he does not answer, his gaze drifting to the trees around them, as if measuring the right words. At last, he says, "I was a Navy SEAL for many years. I have been in places where survival meant making choices no one should have to make. When my son was born, I left that life behind, or I thought I did." Emily listens silently, feeling the weight of his words. Now she understands the way he moved, the way he planned, the way he faced danger without fear. But she also sees the quiet man who cared for his son, who offered her tea and a blanket on a night when she had no one else. She realizes both are the same man, and that is why she feels safe beside him. They begin walking again, the forest closing around them, but this time the silence feels different, not like a trap, but like a shield. Emily knows the danger is not completely gone, but she also knows that with David she has a chance. And as the sun climbs higher, spilling light through the branches, she allows herself to believe that whatever comes next, they will face it together.